The courtroom went silent. Not the kind of silence that feels calm, the kind that feels dangerous. Because when Lance Porter, a loudmouthed car dealer with a temper to match his ego, turned to the woman sitting beside him and sneered, "Shut up, lady," the air changed. Everyone felt it. The clerk froze mid-note. The audience exchanged nervous glances. And at the bench, the experienced female judge didn't blink. But her pen stopped moving. Lance didn't know it yet. But he'd just crossed an invisible line. Won that money. Charm and swagger couldn't walk him back from. See, this wasn't the first time he'd raised his voice to someone. The man made a career out of intimidation, bullying customers, cheating employees, barking his way out of trouble. But this time, he brought his arrogance into the one room where words have weight. The woman he told to shut up? His former business partner, the one who built everything beside him before he took it all and left her with nothing. And now, in front of the nation's sharpest mind in a black robe, she was finally speaking the truth. The judge leaned back, eyes calm but lethal. Her voice was quiet, too quiet. "Mr. Porter," she said, "I suggest you stop talking. You're about to learn what happens when you mistake volume for power. And what came next would make courtroom history, not because of what she said, but because of how coldly, calmly, and brilliantly she dismantled him." The city courthouse buzzed with restless anticipation that morning. It wasn't every day a small claims case drew a crowd, but this wasn't an ordinary dispute. It was personal. Lance Porter strutted through the double doors like he owned the place. Mid-40s, custom navy suit, slicked back hair that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Everything about him screamed control. His smirk alone carried the smug confidence of a man who believed charm was stronger than truth. Behind him, his assistant trailed nervously, clutching folders that could have passed for props in his performance. "Relax. Tass," Lance whispered, loud enough for the cameras. "It's a formality. These TV judges love a good show." He didn't notice the woman sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table. She didn't rise when he entered. She didn't even look up. Melissa Crane, former business partner, co-founder of Porter and Crane Auto Brokers, and the woman who had once been his closest ally and his biggest mistake. Today, she was here for one reason, to make him answer for what he took. When the bailiff announced, "All rise," the room straightened like a wave of discipline, and then she entered, Judge Eleanor Briggs, the experienced female judge with silver hair and the kind of composure that could freeze chaos mid-motion. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, but every inch of her carried authority earned through decades of logic, fairness, and an intolerance for nonsense. "Be seated," she said, voice calm but commanding. Her gaze swept the room once, a quick scan that told her everything she needed to know. The posture of the plaintiff, the defiance in the defendant, the tension that clung to the air like static. Then she turned to Lance. "Mr. Porter, you're the defendant?" He flashed his trademark grin. "Yes, ma'am. Though I think we'll clear this up quickly." The judge didn't smile. "We'll see." Melissa finally looked up. Her hands were steady, her eyes tired but focused. Years of partnership with Lance had taught her exactly how to read that grin. It was his armor, his mask when he was cornered. And she knew, deep down, that behind it was fear disguised as confidence. "Ms. Crane," the judge began, "you're suing for breach of contract and unpaid profits from a jointly owned business?" "Yes, Your Honor," Melissa said softly. "Lance and I started the company together 5 years ago. I handled client relations, he managed sales. But when the business took off, he transferred all assets into his name and cut me out." Lance leaned forward, interrupting. "With all due respect, that's not exactly true." Judge Briggs raised a single finger. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Porter." Her tone wasn't raised, but it sliced through his words like glass. The courtroom fell silent. Lance sat back, feigning a relaxed chuckle. "Of course." "Sorry, Your Honor," Melissa continued. "He promised equal partnership, 50-50. But when we landed our biggest contract, the dealership merger, he told clients I was just an assistant. Then he changed our business registration without telling me." The judge turned to Lance. "Is that correct?" "Not quite," he said, spreading his hands like a salesman explaining away a dented fender. "Look, Your Honor, Melissa and I started the company together, sure. But I funded everything. Every car, every lead, every ad campaign. She helped with paperwork. Yes, but let's not pretend she built the empire." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Empire? He smiled wider. Figure of speech. Noted, she said dryly. Do you have documentation showing your financial contributions? Absolutely, he said confidently, nodding to his assistant. The young woman fumbled with the folders, dropping one on the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. Lance's smirk vanished for a second. Cass, for God's sake! The judge's tone snapped like a whip. Mr. Porter, he froze. You will not raise your voice in my courtroom. Do I make myself clear? His jaw clenched. Yes, ma'am. Good. Continue. Melissa waited, watching him crumble in small, invisible ways. For once, the world wasn't revolving around him. Judge Briggs examined the paperwork his assistant retrieved. These statements confirm business expenses, but they also list joint deposits from both parties. She looked up. Ms. Crane, your name appears on these as co-owner. Yes, Your Honor, that's the point. He used my name when it suited him, then erased it when he wanted full control. Lance sighed loudly. Here we go again. Mr. Porter, the judge said, her tone dropping a degree colder. Do not interrupt again. He leaned back in his chair. Fine. Her gaze stayed on him longer this time. You seem frustrated. I'm just saying she's exaggerating. This whole thing isn't about your feelings, she interrupted. It's about facts. A low murmur of approval rippled through the audience benches. Melissa continued carefully. I'm not here for revenge. I just want what I earned. We made $200,000 in profit that quarter. I never saw my half. Judge Briggs nodded slowly, jotting notes. And you have records of your contributions? Yes, in those folders. Excellent, the judge said, turning back to Lance. Mr. Porter, your defense? He shrugged. I paid her salary. She wasn't an investor. She was staff. Staff? Melissa said, voice rising for the first time. I built your brand. He laughed under his breath. Built it? You answered phones and smiled for customers. The audience gasped. The judge's pen stopped. She looked at him, not with anger, but with something sharper. Disappointment. Mr. Porter, she said slowly, do you often speak to women that way? He blinked. What way? That condescending tone, the kind that assumes you're superior simply because you're louder. He smirked. I just call it honesty. Her eyes didn't move. I call it arrogance. The tension crackled like electricity. Lance tried to recover, forcing a laugh. Your Honor, I didn't mean anything disrespectful. I was just Mr. Porter, she said, her tone flattening. You'd be wise to say less. He couldn't help himself. With all due respect, I'm not the one getting emotional here. She's the one. Shut up, lady. He snapped suddenly, turning toward Melissa. The courtroom gasped. The words hung in the air like poison. Judge Briggs didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply set her pen down. Excuse me? She said quietly. Lance blinked, realizing too late what he'd done. Sorry, I didn't mean— Oh, you meant it, she interrupted. You meant every word. Her calm tone made it worse. Like a surgeon about to make a precise incision. You see, Mr. Porter, I've met men like you for 30 years. Men who confuse confidence with cruelty, who think dominance is a strategy instead of a weakness. He shifted uncomfortably. Do you know what happens when arrogance walks into a courtroom? She continued. It runs headfirst into the law, and the law doesn't blink. Lance looked to his attorney for rescue, but the man avoided eye contact. Judge Briggs leaned forward slightly. I'm going to make something very clear to you, Mr. Porter. You will not speak to anyone in this room that way again. Not to me, not to her, not to anyone. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, he muttered. Louder. Yes, Your Honor. Good. She sat back, the storm now quiet but still powerful. Proceed. Melissa's voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. This is exactly how he treated clients, Your Honor. The same disrespect. The same bullying, the judge nodded. And now we have it on record, Lance groaned. You're really going to hold that against me? The judge's eyes sharpened. I don't hold grudges, Mr. Porter. I hold people accountable. The audience went still. For the next hour, evidence piled up like bricks in a wall. Emails, invoices, witness statements. Every document built the same narrative. Melissa wasn't an employee. She was a partner. Lance tried every angle. Humor, deflection, half-truths. None of it stuck. By the time the judge closed her folder, his smirk was gone. Here's what I see, she said finally. A partnership built on trust, broken by greed. You benefited from her labor, minimized her contribution, and dismissed her role when it was no longer convenient. He looked down, muttering, "That's not fair." She tilted her head. "Fairness isn't your decision to make here." Melissa's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She didn't need to. The truth was finally speaking for itself. Judge Briggs looked between them. "We'll adjourn for today. But let me be clear. This court values integrity, not ego. And tomorrow, Mr. Porter, I expect humility. Not performance." Her gavel struck. Lance sat frozen, realizing he'd just met the one person he couldn't sell a lie to. Outside, cameras waited, but this time, no one asked for his comment. They were too busy replaying the moment his arrogance hit a wall called justice. And inside that courtroom, somewhere deep behind the composure of the silver-haired judge, a quiet satisfaction lingered, not from punishing him, but from teaching him what no deal, contract, or apology could ever buy: respect. The next morning, the tension in the courtroom felt different, heavier, quieter. Lance Porter walked in slower this time. Gone was the exaggerated swagger, but even with his head slightly lowered, he couldn't help throwing one last smirk toward the cameras lined against the back wall. Ego dies hard. Melissa Crane sat at her table again, calm as before. No makeup armor, no nervous fidgeting. Just purpose. She had waited years for this day, not for vengeance, but for validation. The bailiff announced the judge's arrival, and as everyone stood, the experienced female judge entered. Silver hair glowing under the overhead light. Black robe pressed sharp, eyes unreadable. She didn't need to raise her voice to command the room. Her very presence was command. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. Her gaze moved immediately to Lance. "Mr. Porter, I hope you had time to reflect on yesterday's proceedings." He straightened his tie. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good, because we're moving from conversation to evidence." The air thickened. Melissa opened her folder, revealing a neatly bound stack of papers, contracts, messages, and emails printed in chronological order. "Your Honor," she began, "this is our business formation agreement. It shows equal ownership, signed by both of us." The judge nodded. "Let's take a look." Lance's attorney, a young man who clearly regretted taking this case, cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may, but that contract was never finalized. The plaintiff's copy is unsigned by a witness." Melissa's expression didn't flinch. "Because Lance tore up the original before we could file it. That copy survived because I scanned it the night before." The judge's brow arched. "You scanned it?" "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I knew better than to trust his promises." Lance scoffed under his breath. "Paranoid as ever." Judge Briggs fixed him with a look that silenced the room. "That's enough," Melissa continued, steady now. "This email shows him confirming our partnership. He refers to me as co-founder. Here, and again in his investor pitch deck." She handed over the evidence. The judge flipped through each page, pausing at a line highlighted in yellow: Melissa Crane, operations head and co-owner. Her gaze lifted. "Mr. Porter, this is your email signature. Correct?" Lance's tongue flicked nervously against his teeth. "Maybe. Hard to say." "We had templates," she interrupted. "Mr. Porter, it's dated and time-stamped. Sent from your personal address." He forced a smile. "Okay, fine." I might have used that wording for optics. "You know, make the team look stronger." "Optics," she repeated, pen tapping softly against her pad. "So you misrepresented her role to investors for appearance, but deny her profit in practice. Is that your defense?" He hesitated. "That's not what I meant." "Then clarify," she said, leaning forward. "Quickly. I mean, look, she helped. But helping and owning aren't the same." The judge's tone dropped lower, quieter. "When someone builds something with you, that distinction becomes a moral one. Mr. Porter, and moral debts don't vanish when paper burns." The courtroom held its breath. Lance's frustration boiled beneath the surface. "So what, I'm the villain now?" "No," the judge replied coolly. "You're just the one still talking." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience before she shot them a look that restored instant silence. Melissa took a slow breath. "He promised me 50% ownership. When I questioned the missing paperwork, he called me replaceable. I left that night. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from his lawyer saying I was terminated from my own company." The judge's pen froze mid-stroke. "Terminated?" "Yes, ma'am. By a man who calls you a co-founder in writing." Melissa nodded. Lance blurted out, "Your Honor, this is business, not betrayal." It's called efficiency. She turned to him with that same icy calm. Efficiency, she said, is cutting expenses. What you did was cut integrity. The case turned next to finances, the one place Lance had always believed his numbers could protect him. Let's talk profit distribution, the judge said. You claimed you paid her salary. Exactly, Lance said quickly, seizing the opening. I paid her well. I'd $45,000 a year plus bonuses. Melissa leaned in. And you made how much in that same year? He smirked faintly. About $600,000. Maybe $7,000, the courtroom murmured again. Judge Briggs raised a hand. Quiet, then to Lance. And you think that's equitable? He shrugged. I built the brand. No, she said. You built ego. She built trust. And customers buy trust long before they buy cars. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was surgical. Each word cut precisely where it needed to. The plaintiff's next witness was called, a soft-spoken middle-aged man named Greg Sanders, a former client. He adjusted his tie nervously as he took the stand. Mr. Sanders, Melissa asked gently, can you tell the court how you came to do business with Porter and Crane? Yes, I'd heard about the dealership merger they handled. Melissa personally called me, walked me through financing options, followed up every week. She's the reason I signed, the judge nodded. And Mr. Porter's role? He showed up to collect the check, Greg said awkwardly. Lance rolled his eyes. I'm the closer. That's what I do. The judge's gaze sharpened again. You seem to close doors as easily as you open them, Mr. Porter. He started to protest, but stopped himself this time. The lesson from yesterday was slowly sinking in. After the witness stepped down, the courtroom felt heavy again, not from drama, but from truth finally aligning in plain sight. The judge leaned back, folding her hands. Mr. Porter, it seems clear that Ms. Crane contributed substantially to the success of this company. Her labor, her credibility, and her reputation carried weight. Lance bit the inside of his cheek. I'm not saying she didn't do some work, but she wasn't half the business. Come on, why not? He hesitated. Because I'm the one who made things happen. She just what? Stayed behind the scenes. Her silence stretched long enough to make even the camera crew uneasy. Mr. Porter, she said finally, it's often the people behind the scenes who hold everything together while others collect applause. Don't mistake visibility for value. Her words landed with the weight of truth. Even Melissa blinked back emotion she hadn't expected. As the court recessed for lunch, reporters scrambled to the hallway. Lance brushed past them, muttering, "Media circus." But he couldn't escape the cameras this time. They were there for his fall, not his fame. Meanwhile, Melissa sat on a bench outside, her eyes closed. A deep breath. The kind that tastes like freedom for the first time in years. Alan, her attorney, handed her a cup of coffee. You're doing great, she smiled faintly. Feels strange. For so long, I thought the truth didn't matter. It always matters, he said. It just takes the right person to listen. Inside the courtroom, that person, Judge Briggs, was reviewing every document again. Her pen moved swiftly, noting contradictions, highlighting patterns. She'd seen greed before, but this case was different. It wasn't just about money. It was about a man who built an empire on dismissing others, finally colliding with someone he couldn't dismiss. And that realization made tomorrow's verdict inevitable. When court resumed, the judge looked composed, ready. Before we close for the day, she said, I have one final question. Her gaze fixed on Lance. Do you regret telling Ms. Crane to shut up yesterday? He swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Why? He hesitated. Because it made me look bad, the judge sighed softly. Still not the right answer. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him. You should regret it because it revealed who you are, not because people saw it. He had no comeback. She tapped her gavel lightly. Tomorrow I'll deliver my decision. Until then, I suggest you think about whether what you built was truly a business or just a mirror reflecting your pride. The courtroom sat still as she rose and exited. Melissa didn't smile. She didn't need to. The tide had already turned, and Lance Porter, the man who once thought silence was submission, was about to find out that in this courtroom, silence speaks louder than arrogance ever could. The third day began with rain. Gray clouds pressed low over the courthouse, the kind of weather that turns anticipation into electricity. Inside, the courtroom was hushed, packed wall to wall. Everyone knew today was the day. Lance Porter sat at the defendant's table, staring at the grain of the wood, jaw tight. His once flawless posture now slouched under the weight of sleeplessness and public scrutiny. He could feel the cameras on him, the murmurs, the quiet judgment before the verdict even began. Across the room, Melissa Crane sat upright, steady, calm, the same way she'd been when she was the one cleaning up Lance's chaos in their company years ago. Only now she wasn't saving him. She was saving herself, the bailiff's voice boomed. All rise. The experienced female judge entered, black robe flowing, silver hair gleaming under the cold courtroom light. She looked neither angry nor kind. She looked ready. Be seated, she said, and the air folded into silence. Mr. Porter, Ms. Crane. Her tone was even. I've reviewed all the evidence, every statement, every record. What we have here is not merely a dispute over money. It's a question of character, how people behave when power shifts. She looked down at her notes. Mr. Porter, your argument is that you were the sole investor, that the business belonged entirely to you. Yes, Your Honor, Lance said quickly. Every dollar came from me. Incorrect, she replied instantly. The records show $45,000 in deposits from Ms. Crane's personal accounts. Your co-founder's money, used for marketing, office rent, and licensing. You called it a loan. You never repaid it, he swallowed hard. That was a bookkeeping issue, her eyebrow arched. Bookkeeping doesn't erase bank transfers. A low chuckle rippled through the audience before her gaze silenced them again. Let's move on, she said. Mr. Porter, your own testimony described Ms. Crane as replaceable. Yet I find it interesting that after she left, your profits fell nearly 60% within 2 months. He blinked. Market shift. She turned the page. Or lack of competence. Lance flinched. Your investors testified that they withdrew not because of her, but because of you, your attitude, your inability to listen, and your habit of making unilateral decisions. He leaned forward, frustration breaking through. Your Honor, with all due respect, I made that company successful. Me. The judge's voice dropped to a quiet firmness that carried more power than shouting ever could. Mr. Porter, the difference between leadership and tyranny is how you treat the people who helped you climb. You used her as a ladder and then kicked it away. The courtroom fell still. Melissa's hands trembled slightly, but her chin remained high. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe, a deep, freeing breath that reached years back. The judge continued. Ms. Crane, you documented your hours, expenses, and correspondence. I find your evidence consistent, credible, and compelling. Your demeanor, professional. Your testimony, clear. Then she looked back at Lance. Mr. Porter, your statements were inconsistent. You contradicted yourself 7 times across 2 sessions. You exaggerated your role, diminished hers, and presented incomplete financial records. When challenged, you resorted to belittlement instead of logic. He tried one last, desperate smirk. Maybe I just don't perform well under pressure. Her tone turned glacial. You performed quite well when you told a woman to shut up in my courtroom. That was the truest moment of this trial. The sound of a pen clicking echoed through the room. It was hers. Each click measured, deliberate. Mr. Porter, she said, you seem to think that authority can be intimidated, that truth bends to personality. It doesn't. Justice doesn't flinch, and neither do I. She stood slightly, her robe settling with finality. In this court's opinion, Ms. Crane was an equal partner in Porter and Crane Auto Brokers. Her removal was unlawful, her profits withheld unjustly, and her reputation damaged by Mr. Porter's conduct. Lance's face drained of color. I hereby order Mr. Porter to pay the plaintiff $100,000 in compensatory damages, plus an additional $50,000 in punitive damages for bad faith and emotional distress. The crowd gasped, but she wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, this court recommends a formal investigation into Mr. Porter's business practices for potential fraud and tax misrepresentation. The words hit like thunder. Lance shot up. What? That's insane. You can't. The gavel came down sharp and final. I can, and I did. The silence afterward was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The judge leaned forward, voice quiet now. Mr. Porter, arrogance may open doors, but it's humility that keeps them from slamming shut. You thought the rules didn't apply to you. Consider this your reminder. They do. He stared at her, speechless. Then, for the first time in his life, Lance Porter sat down without a word. The judge turned to Melissa. "Ms. Crane, you may finally close this chapter. The court recognizes your work, your worth, and your patience." Melissa's voice cracked slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded once, her expression softening just a touch. "You earned it." As the gavel struck one last time, the courtroom exhaled. Reporters rushed toward Melissa outside the courthouse. "How does it feel to win?" one shouted. She paused, thinking carefully. "It's not about winning. It's about being heard." Then she turned and walked down the steps. No tears, no triumph. Just quiet dignity. Lance exited minutes later, surrounded by flashing cameras. The same reporters who once begged for his quotes now hurled questions like stones. "Mr. Porter, will you appeal? Are the fraud allegations true? Do you regret your comments to the judge?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew the truth wasn't something you could negotiate anymore. It was written in the record, permanent, undeniable. Later that evening, back in her chambers, Judge Briggs sat alone with her cup of coffee, watching the rain streak down the window. Her clerk peeked in. "Rough one?" The judge smiled faintly. "Not rough, necessary." She flipped open her notebook. On the final page, beneath the day's notes, she wrote just one line: "Respect cannot be demanded. It must be demonstrated." Then she closed the book, placed it beside her gavel, and turned off the light. Meanwhile, across town, Melissa unlocked the door to her small apartment. On the kitchen counter sat an unopened bottle of champagne, a gift from a friend she'd ignored for weeks, too focused on the trial to think about celebrations. She poured one glass, sat by the window, and whispered to no one, "It's over." But what she didn't realize yet was that this wasn't an ending. It was the start of something far greater, because somewhere, deep in the silence left behind, Lance Porter was beginning to unravel, and redemption, if it ever came, would have to be earned the same way justice was delivered in that courtroom. Without shortcuts, without excuses, and under the unblinking light of truth. The morning after the verdict felt still. For the first time in years, Lance Porter woke without a ringing phone, without an assistant scheduling calls, without an email demanding his attention. His empire, or what was left of it, when it was quiet. The silence was deafening. He sat at his kitchen counter, staring into a cold cup of coffee. His reflection wavered in the dark surface. The same face that used to grin from magazine covers now looked older, not from time, but from truth. He replayed the courtroom in his mind. The look on the experienced female judge's face when she said, "You used her as a ladder, and then kicked it away." That line had cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Because she was right. He didn't just lose money. He lost respect, and that, he realized, was the one thing you couldn't buy back. Across town, Melissa Crane was getting her first full night's sleep in months. When the sunlight filtered through her apartment blinds, she smiled, not because she'd won, but because she could finally breathe again. The pressure, the humiliation, the self-doubt, all of it had lifted. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her attorney, Alan. "Congratulations again. Press wants a statement. I told them you're declining interviews? Good choice." She smiled faintly. "Thanks, Alan. I'm just happy it's over." But even as she typed those words, she knew it wasn't over. It was only beginning. Because justice doesn't just end in a courtroom. It echoes in the choices that follow. 3 weeks later, Melissa stood in front of a for lease sign. Behind it sat the same building that once housed Porter and Crane auto brokers. The windows were dusty now, the logo faded. A ghost of success long gone, a realtor approached. "You interested in taking over the space?" Melissa looked through the glass, at the empty desks, the familiar office where she'd once built her dreams. She nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." And just like that, Crane Automotive Group was born. Meanwhile, Lance's fall was public. The media chewed through his name like wildfire. Disgraced auto mogul faces audit. Former businessman ordered to pay $150,000 after courtroom clash. Judge's viral takedown becomes internet sensation. Clips from the hearing flooded social media. His outburst. The judge's icy calm. Melissa's quiet composure. Millions watched it, analyzed it, memed it. For the first time, Lance wasn't admired. He was a cautionary tale he tried to rebuild. He called investors and they didn't answer. He reached out to friends, most ghosted him. Even his father, once his biggest supporter, offered little sympathy. "You embarrassed yourself," his father said flatly over the phone. "You embarrassed the family name. I can't fix that for you." "Dad, I'm working on it." "Work harder," came the reply. Click. Lance stared at the phone. For the first time, he had no one left to charm, no one to manipulate. Just himself, and a long, cold stretch of silence. Weeks turned into months. He sold his luxury car, then his apartment. Moved into a smaller place. A one-bedroom on the east side with peeling paint and paper-thin walls. One night, he sat flipping through the channels when a familiar face appeared. Melissa. She was on a local news segment, standing in front of her reopened dealership, surrounded by smiling employees. "We're not just selling cars," she said. "We're rebuilding trust, one customer at a time." The reporter smiled. "And what inspired this new chapter?" Melissa paused thoughtfully. "A lesson. That character is what drives everything. Not money, not status, just character." Lance muted the TV. He didn't feel anger. He felt something worse, recognition. The next day, he walked past his old office. The building had been repainted. The new sign, Crane Automotive Group, gleamed proudly in gold. Through the glass, he saw Melissa laughing with her team. For a brief second, their eyes met. He froze. She didn't look away. Neither of them did. Then, with a simple nod, Melissa returned to her conversation. No hatred, no revenge. Just peace. And that somehow hit him harder than the verdict. That evening, he found himself outside the courthouse again. The same one where his downfall began. The marble steps glistened under the streetlights, rain pooling in shallow puddles. He sat on the bottom step, head in his hands. A voice startled him. "Mr. Porter," he looked up. Standing a few feet away was Judge Eleanor Briggs, umbrella in hand, on her way out after a late session. He blinked, unsure if it was real. "Your Honor?" She stopped studying him. "You look different." He let out a breathy laugh. "That's one word for it." "I didn't expect to see you back here," she said. "I didn't expect to come," he admitted. "Guess I needed to see where it all started." The judge nodded, her expression unreadable. "Did you learn anything?" She asked finally. He hesitated. Then, honestly, for the first time, he said, "Yeah, that I spent half my life mistaking fear for strength. And respect for control." She tilted her head. "That's a start." He met her gaze. "I never thanked you." Her eyes softened slightly. "You don't owe me thanks, Mr. Porter. You owed the truth to yourself." He nodded slowly. "I didn't like you very much that day." "You weren't supposed to," she said, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "The law doesn't exist to comfort you. It exists to confront you." He looked away, then back again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you said I used people as ladders, were you ever that person?" The judge paused, her eyes distant for a moment. "We all were once. The difference is, some of us learn to climb differently." Then she turned to leave. "Good night, Mr. Porter." "Good night, Your Honor." And as her footsteps faded, Lance stayed sitting in the rain, humbled but somehow lighter. Months later, a quiet headline appeared online. "Former auto mogul launches charity for underprivileged mechanics." No interviews, no press release. Just a small organization aimed at funding technical training for youth who couldn't afford it. And on its website, one line stood out. "For everyone who was ever told to shut up, your voice matters." No one noticed the anonymous donor listed under the launch fund. But Melissa did. And when she read it, she smiled. A small, knowing smile. The following spring, both of them found themselves invited to the same City Business Awards ceremony. Melissa was being recognized for outstanding community leadership. Lance, surprisingly, for his charity work. When their names were called, there was a hush, a curiosity in the crowd, a flicker of history resurfacing. Lance approached her afterward, extending a hand. "Congratulations, Ms. Crane," she shook it. "You too, Mr. Porter." Neither mentioned the past. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. As the night wound down, Lance slipped outside, standing under the glow of the city lights. A soft voice spoke behind him. "You know," said Judge Briggs, appearing beside him again. "You clean up well." He chuckled. "Guess some lessons stick," she nodded. "That's the point." He looked out over the skyline. "You ever think people can really change?" She didn't hesitate. "People don't change because they're told to. They change because they finally listen. He smiled faintly. Then I'm still listening. Good, she said. Keep it that way. Then, like before, she walked away, quietly, deliberately, leaving him to the echo of her words. In that moment, Lance Porter realized something simple yet profound. Redemption wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause or press or even forgiveness. It came in silence, in the way you carried yourself when no one was watching. He'd spent his whole life chasing validation, mistaking success for worth. Now, standing under the same sky that once witnessed his arrogance, he felt something new. Peace. For the first time, he wasn't the loudest voice in the room, and that finally made him whole.